everyone, my name is Gabby, and it's been a few weeks since I last uploaded. A large part of that is because things started to get really tense, and I wanted to take a little bit of a break to give people a voice that needed to have it at the moment, and I also just recognized the fact that there was a lot of toxicity going on within the community, and a lot of creators are being called out for their missteps, and I just figured it would be best to take a step back because I'm not very good in those very tense and hostile situations, and I figured that right at that moment, what people needed was not my content that's more focused on entertainment and storytelling and whatever, but needed to focus on serious issues. So I'm back now, and for today's video, I am going to be discussing the first 2 episodes of the 7th season of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I posted my first Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. related video a few weeks back in which I pretty much talked about all of my favorite characters, my favorite seasons, just kind of letting you guys know some of my general thoughts about the show, and I knew that I wanted to talk more about the 7th season in some capacity on my channel. I just didn't know in what form that was going to be taking yet. Originally, I was going to make a video sorting the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. characters into Hogwarts houses. There's a part of me that still wants to do that, but after everything that happened with J.K. Rowling, I just recognized that it wouldn't be the right time. But if you do still want to see that video, let me know in the comments and I'll consider whether or not I will make it. But for now, I decided that now that the season is halfway over, I would go through and talk about 2 episodes per video, and that covers each of the different time periods that the show has gone to thus far, and from then that point on, I'll try to make individual videos discussing each episode. And I'm not going to be doing live reactions, mainly because I have a lot going on when I'm watching each of the episodes live. I figured it'd be easier to take some time, rewatch the episode, compose all of my thoughts, and then put together this review, but try to make it quick and snappy and give you all my just general thoughts on the episode, because I know with doing some of my Shadowhunters reviews in the past that they can get very long and very overwhelming. So I'm going to try to stay away from that and try to make these reviews a little bit easier to digest. But without further ado, I want to just dive right on in to discussing the first 2 episodes of this season. So if you are not caught up yet, go and catch up, and then you can come back and we can discuss together. But for those of you who have watched the episodes, let's dive right on into discussing. So I have been waiting for this season for over a year, and I've just been clinging to every tiny little thing I could get. The first thing that I remember hearing about this 7th season was from D23, and they premiered the first episode of the 7th season. Somebody posted a description of the episode who had been at D23 and saw the episode, so I read that description, and the first thing that I found out that I immediately flipped out about was the costuming. Particularly what stuck out to me was that Deke Shaw was going to be dressed as a newsie. So if you do not know from watching my previous Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. video, Deke Shaw is my favorite character on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I love him to pieces. So when I found out that he was going to be dressed as a newsie, immediately the first thing that came to my mind was blasting the original Broadway cast recording of Newsies and screaming King of New York at the top of my lungs and just being so excited about all of that. I just couldn't get it out of my mind, and I was just so curious as to what the costume was going to look like, how that was going to reflect his character, just had so many thoughts. And then we get a still at the beginning of the year of all of the characters in their period piece costumes in the 1930s, and I got to see the Newsies costume and I was immediately even more excited, and then getting to see all of the other characters' period piece costumes, I was just so amazed at the level of detail that went into putting those outfits together, and I just knew that the 7th season was going to be stepping it up a notch, and that's absolutely what has happened thus far. The title cards for each of the episodes are period themed. The VFX is amazing. The writer's room is just killing it with so many amazing one-liners. The costuming is by far my favorite part of the season, and it's so good. And all of the outfits match the characters' personalities so well. The hair and makeup is amazing and complements the outfits so well. The actors themselves are doing such a phenomenal job of really making you feel for these characters. The directors are perfect for each and every single episode. The episodes are cut together beautifully. I just love everything, and I think as of right now, season 7 is by far my favorite season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm so excited to see how everything wraps up, but so far, I am in love with this season. So one of the things that I particularly love about this 7th season is that you sort of get to go along on the journey with the characters. I feel like in previous seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the characters know certain pieces of information, and you're just waiting to find it out as an audience member, whereas this 7th season, time travel travel is involved. And time travel, as we know, can be very messy and very difficult to explain because there's so many different franchises that have taken on time travel, and each franchise has their own rules for how time travel works. But one of the things that I love is that Deke gets a line in the first episode where he explains the time travel rules or how he thinks that they work, and he basically describes it as like a dam, and so every little change that's made is like a stick, and if you have enough sticks that fill up the dam, then that's when you start to make changes. And so you get this metaphor of like ripples, not waves, trying not to change the timeline in any way, trying to preserve as many things as possible. And I thought that made so much more sense than Bruce Banner's explanation in Endgame, and I've watched Endgame almost 4 or 5 times, and still that line that Bruce has about your present becomes your past and all of this other nonsense is so confusing to me. I don't know why. Like, I'm a smart person, but for some reason it just wasn't clicking when I listened to it because you're repeating the words past, present, and future multiple times, and so I would need to like literally write it down for myself, stare at it, and process it in order to get it, whereas Dee's explanation is a lot easier and quicker. The general rule of thumb for time travel in the show is that, you know, we don't really understand it. We're just kind of doing what we can and following the Chronicoms and just trying to stop whatever their plan is and figuring it out as we go. And that's really fun because it's sort of this fast-paced environment, and you, the audience member, gets to be along with the characters as they're figuring out everything, and it just feels a lot more immersive, and so I'm really enjoying that aspect of this season. So the first episode of season 7 is called The New Deal, and it starts out with the scene of the Chronicoms stealing the faces of several cops, and one of the Chronicoms that was in that scene was actually Luke Baines, who you may know as Jonathan Morgenstern from Shadowhunters. So if you know me and you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that I absolutely hate Shadowhunters. I detest that show. It is the worst show I have ever watched in my entire life because it is the adaptation of my favorite book series in the entire world. And so I was really nervous that Luke Bain was going to become a series regular and that I was going to have to watch him in multiple episodes of S.H.I.E.L.D. And nothing against him, but I just didn't want to be thinking about Shadowhunters when I was watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I just, like, don't know how I would have handled it. Thankfully, he hasn't shown up again, and he did good in the one scene that he had, so there was that. But it definitely made me nervous when I saw it in the preview because that was one of the only things that we were given for a period of time before we got a trailer at all. And so I was just thinking, oh no, what am I gonna do if I have to deal with this? And thankfully it wasn't a problem. So then we get to see Coulson. Daisy pushes the button at the end of season 6 to wake him up, and we get to see Coulson again, and he's essentially having to process 2 years worth of information that he didn't have before, and he starts to have this breakdown where he starts to glitch and he's just trying to take everything in. And Clark Gregg did such a wonderful job in that scene. Chloe Bennett did such a wonderful job of just being in awe and Coulson being in front of her again. It was such an emotional and moving moment, and I'm so happy that Coulson is back with the rest of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and I love that he's taken on a new role, that he is essentially a source of information and a guide and a help to them because he knows a lot of S.H.I.E.L.D. history that the rest of the younger agents won't know. That history is going to be super helpful in going back in time, having to dissect the history of S.H.I.E.L.D. and figure out at what points the Chronicoms are going to want to try to dismantle S.H.I.E.L.D. The fact that Coulson also steps back and lets Mac be the leader and be the director, and he's immediately just there to help them out, and he has that one line about like, I'd do anything to help you guys, and that just warmed my heart so much. I love Coulson and I missed him. So we get this beautiful opening shot of the 1930s, and this was the moment that it really hit me, like this season is going to be something else. You get to see Deke, Daisy, Mac, and Coulson walking along the street, and you kind of get to pan up as you get to see this entire streetway. You get to see them in their period piece costuming. It's just so beautiful, and the camera work on that scene was just gorgeous, and for me, like, was a highlight of the episode to just get to really take that all in, because I think I felt for the first time the impact of the time travel, the impact of them being in a different era, and really just getting to appreciate that moment and the gift that we were being given this season. So we get lots of really great character moments in this first episode. One of them is getting to see Daisy be this badass 1930s feminist. A cop essentially asks her why she's with all of these other Mounties, and Daisy goes off and is like, there's guys that try to get in my business, and when I do, I end up breaking all of their ribs, and goes off on him, and I love it. I think it's such a beautiful beginning to some of the conversations that are had in later episodes about how this really diverse cast of characters has to take on a lot of the racism and sexism of the 1930s and the 1950s, and having that conversation in a really brilliant way that allows the show to still tell all of the stories that it needs to tell, but acknowledge the things that the characters are experiencing in these time periods. And I just loved it. I think it was a really great preview of that, and Chloe Bennett did such a wonderful job in that scene, and it just made me love Daisy all the more because she's such a badass and is not afraid to stand up to anyone. So then we have another beautiful moment that I thought was really heartfelt between Yo-Yo and Simmons, where Simmons gives Yo-Yo her hands, and initially Yo-Yo is reluctant to accept them because she's comfortable with the attachments that she already has. She doesn't feel ashamed of what it is that she's went through, and I think this moment is a really beautiful learning moment for Simmons, because instead of forcing the invention onto Yo-Yo, she tells her, like, I don't understand what it is you're going through, I can't possibly understand, but I want you to know that these are here for you, and I want you to be able to feel something again. And also the gentle nod of, if you want to go out into the field, you're not going to be able to wear the attachments that you currently have because you have to be able to blend in as much as possible, but ultimately it's your decision, your choice. And I think that's a really beautiful example of disability rep, because those of us who don't have disabilities are never going to know what it's like for someone who does, but we can try to be a friend, try to help them, try to give them gentle encouragement, but ultimately leave the decision to them as to how capable they feel they can handle certain things. And I just really, really loved that scene. I think it was really brilliantly written, and I think Natalia and Elizabeth did such a wonderful job bringing that moment to life. So in this first episode, we got to see a reappearance of a very beloved character on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and that's Koenig! I was so happy that they brought back Patton Oswalt for this season, because he does such a good job of playing Koenig, who's a really interesting character because he has very many iterations in this show, and each and every single one manages to be distinct. I loved this version of Koenig and a lot of his one-liners, and how he's very quippy and is a little bit more of a hot shot. He's just such a fun character, and I was so happy to see him back. Later on in the episode, we start to sort of figure out what the whole time travel aspect is going to look like. What we learn is that the Chronicoms are trying to take down S.H.I.E.L.D. Initially, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents think that the Chronicoms are going to take down FDR, because FDR is the one that creates the SSR, which later becomes S.H.I.E.L.D., so if they take him out, S.H.I.E.L.D. will never be created in the first place. However, that is not their game plan. What instead ends up happening is that the Chronicoms want to try to kill Freddy, because he is the father of Gideon Malik and is ultimately the person that allows Hydra to come to exist. So if you take out Hydra, S.H.I.E.L.D. will never form to stop Hydra. And I mean, those two differing schools of thought were mind-blowing to me, and I would have been really curious to see what would have happened if the Chronicoms had went after FDR instead, like how that would have worked. But what we did get from this was this gorgeous banquet scene where we have Daisy in this gorgeous emerald green dress looking stunning, and all of our men in tuxedos, and seeing Deke Shaw in a tuxedo. I'm gonna be talking a lot about Deke's costuming in these videos because he has the best costumes this season by far. But seeing him in a tux was something I was not prepared for, even though I looked back at the description for this episode that I read almost a year ago and realized it was mentioned, and I just completely forgot about it. So it was a nice surprise again to see it. It was beautiful, the costuming was great, and seeing Deke bond with Freddy and seeing the fact that they have some things in common made my heart really happy. And then I found out that he was a Malik, and I was immediately like, no, keep Deke away from Freddy, because if you haven't noticed, I have a lot of self-interest in Deke's preservation. I want him to live by the end of the 7th season. I want him to be happy, and I'm so scared. So him being near Freddy was like not okay for me. I was like, that's not good. So wasn't a fan of that, but I was happy to see them connecting for a little bit, for Deke to have a friend. And then, you know, Freddy ended up being Malik, and I'm not surprised, because I knew they were going to introduce the Hydra element into this season somehow. A large part of that was because one of the first lines that we got in the trailer that I think a lot of people hung on to was something that Coulson said that was essentially along the lines of, in order to save S.H.I.E.L.D., we have to save Hydra. So I was like, well, how are they going to go about dealing dealing with that, and so bringing in Freddie, Malik, and sort of having to make that decision as to how they handle Hydra and do they let it form, do they not, I think is a really interesting question, and it's ultimately what leads us to our second episode of this season, which is called Know Your Onions. One of my favorite moments in this episode is very much a throwaway moment, but I love it so much, and it's when Deke and Freddie are talking and the walkie-talkie that Deke is using is not working. He's not able to get connection to Daisy, and Freddie's like, doesn't it need to be plugged into something? And Deke says in this perfect 1930s New York accent, I didn't know I was talking to a freaking genius, and Jeff Ward's delivery of that line was so beautiful. I immediately had to like go back and watch it 5 times because I was just in love with it. It was such brilliant delivery, and it was really good to see Deke standing up for himself in a way that was very much on brand for him, because he is constantly the moving target of this crew. It does not matter what he does. He steals the car in the first episode. Simmons immediately goes and yells at him, and she's like, Daisy's right there! You know, he constantly takes flack from all the other agents, and it's nice to see him in a way stand up for himself in a sarcastic and humorous way. I love Deke as a character so much. I have so much love for him. He has such a big heart, and he's trying so hard, and I just loved that moment because it felt nice to see him stand up for himself and acknowledge the fact that he knows a lot more of what's going on than Freddie does, and the sarcasm there was just beautiful. Later on in the episode, we get our big realization of what Freddie is going to be delivering, and in the first episode we see this like green vial that has some liquid in it, and it has a cork in it that has the Hydra logo on top, and immediately that's our clue of like, okay, great, we're dealing with Hydra. And then we find out that the green liquid is the main ingredient for the super soldier serum that was used to create Captain America and was used by Red Skull, and I was immediately like, oh my god, where is this going? What does this mean? It didn't end up being that much of a big deal, but I was still very excited at the prospect of that because I was like, oh my god, S.H.I.E.L.D. history and all of these really exciting reveals, and I thought that was really cool. And Gemma Simmons is such a badass that she was able to find this tiny little speck of green liquid on that Hydra girl's shoe and immediately be able to examine it using a makeshift lab setup and find out what it is. She's so brilliant, and the fact that she doesn't take anything from Koenig and stands up to him in a very feminist way and is like, I am not a dame, I am a doctor, and just like such a queen. Ugh, I love Simmons. So the big point of this episode is, do we save Freddie? Do we kill him? That's really the ultimate question, the big plot thread in this episode. When Daisy finally gets in contact with Deke, she tells him that Freddie is a Malik, that he is responsible for creating Hydra, and that you have to kill him, especially when she finds out that Deke has a weapon, and he wants to do it. Mac tells him to stand down because Mac is ultimately the director and is the one that's calling all of the shots here, and so Deke decides to not take the shot, which I was like, thank goodness. But still, I was a little bit worried for a second because it seemed like he was considering it. And I love the fact that Mac is like, I am the director, you take orders from nobody except for me, and I am telling you to stand down. Henry Simmons is a legend, and I'm so glad that he became director of S.H.I.E.L.D. because he just kills it and has so many great moments, and he's so underappreciated. So then we end the episode with Koenig and Enoch. Enoch gets left behind as the group jumps to the next decade, which is the 1950s. Enoch ends up staying at the bar with Koenig, and the little conversation that they have that's in the tag for the episode I thought was so cute. It really started to spur in my mind as to some theories of what is going to happen in the rest of the season. I was sort of thinking like, what if time travel works the way that it does in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, where you were always there in time even if you didn't know it. Like if you've watched The Prisoner of Azkaban and you know how the time turners work, like you know what I'm talking about, because Enoch seemed like he was telling Koenig all of these things about his future that would sort of lead for his grandkids to develop the way that they do. I just like started thinking about that a little bit, and I was like, I wonder. And I think it was the first moment I started to be invested in the bigger picture of this season and what was going on, rather than the small submission of like, do we kill Freddie, do we not? So I think that is about it for my thoughts on the first 2 episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I loved the 1930s decade. I just thought these first 2 episodes were so wonderful and such a great way to kick off the season. If you want to let me know your thoughts on these first 2 episodes in the comment section down below, definitely do that. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at GabbyYABooks with 1 Y. I hope you all are having a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new one. Goodbye!